Hello everyone and welcome back to the Cyclocross Social podcast. Oh, I am so eager to get into this and talk about an exciting afternoon of racing in Beekse Bergen. We had two fantastic races and with me here to discuss them is Issam.
Yes, thank you for having me.
As I already said, two exciting races here in the Beekse Bergen today. A new race on the World Cup calendar and another new race will be Benidorm on the 22nd of January. We are pleased to be working together with the Benidorm World Cup to promote their event. If you are interested in going there, flights are relatively cheap, so you can get there and have a nice weekend away in the sun. Visit the racing and use the code CXSocial for a 20% discount on your ticket. Now on to talk about the racing in the Beekse Bergen. Issam will tell us what went down in the men's race.
In the men's race, we had the fastest start for Kevin Kuhn again. But when there is scent, there is always a Sweeck that is going to try to be at the front. So he was starting quite well. Iserbyt missed his start a little bit because he went out of his pedal, had to get back into it and lost a couple of positions and had to try to fight his way back to the front. Van der Haar, a fast course, so he is also definitely someone to take notice of and loves these kind of races. Then there is a crash of Kuhn. Kuhn holds up the group behind him, and there are two guys that have a gap, Van der Haar and Sweeck. Vanthourenhout is one of the guys that is able to bridge the gap to the two in front, and then we have three. Nieuwenhuis blows the chase behind into a new live in a way, and is able to successfully bridge that gap to the three in front. So then we have four. Iserbyt had difficulties at the start of the race, and for a long time it seems like it was going to be a kind of an off day for him and a bit of damage limitation. But in the later stages of the race, he was actually able to gain a couple of positions, and at a certain point seemed to actually bridge the gap to the four in front. And in the last lap, we actually had five guys that were actually able to fight for a podium. Vanthourenhout was the first guy to lead them out and try to put the others under pressure. For the entire lap, he was leading the guys behind him. Into the last corner, Vanthourenhout was still leading, but Sweeck was the one that initiates the sprint first and stays ahead. Van der Haar sprints to second and Vanthourenhout finishes in third. Nieuwenhuis is fourth and Iserbyt, despite trying to get back to the group, only manages to finish in fifth.
I thought it was quite an entertaining race with the momentum and initiative switching hands a couple of times. You already mentioned it, Iserbyt after the bad start still came back into it, and of course people were quick to speculate about his injury, and of course in Neil the story that he crashed has gone a bit unnoticed as well. So people were very quick to draw the conclusions that he still was having issues with the injury, and after the race he said he still had a bit of issues but it wasn't too serious. So I was happy to see him be able to join the front runners again, even if it was only at the final 1.5 laps of the race, because it really gave an extra dimension to it, with Vanthourenhout pacing in the final lap, with Iserbyt being a bit behind. You already mentioned that you maybe questioned a bit that Vanthourenhout was going so hard in the final lap. The Sporza commentators, it's the Belgian broadcaster, they also said that Vanthourenhout maybe was too good today and therefore robbed Iserbyt of a chance of sprinting for victory. He already outsprinted Sweeck. What's your thought on that? Was Sweeck just way too strong, or did Paul Sauze for once have a bad day in terms of team tactics?
It's a combination, but Vanthourenhout was definitely having a good day. On a course like this, we already discussed that last week, where we were saying that he needs a tougher course and a bit more climbing. When it's fast, it's for him a bit more difficult to show himself at the front and be able to actually bring up the fight to the likes of Sweeck and Van der Haar, who are just a little bit better on these type of courses. But I think today Vanthourenhout really looked good, and in the last lap he was actually able to put the other guys under pressure. But I just feel that when you have a teammate that is leading the World Cup and at the moment still leading, but the margin is very small, it wouldn't be weird to at a certain point, especially later on in that last lap, when you're not succeeding in gapping Sweeck and Van der Haar, to maybe think a little bit more about your teammate and be like, okay, maybe I can hold these guys a bit more up and see what I can do. But it's a fast course, and I can understand that he probably thought that positioning is very important. He wanted to stay in the front. He put them under serious pressure, but when he went on the start-finish line, the last corner, he was the first guy there, but he didn't really want to sprint, and that's always a sign that your legs are kind of done and you don't have much left, and it showed in the sprint. So I think that looking back at it, and he will definitely look back at it, and Iserbyt as well, they could have played it a little bit different, but in the race there is not much to blame for Vanthourenhout. I think that he just had a good day, he felt very well, and he just had a crack at it. So yeah.
But Vanthourenhout in the final lap did think about Iserbyt, because in the technical section, the fourth section, which had like a million corners chained together, he went all out, and that was what he had to do, because he knows he doesn't have a chance in the sprint against Sweeck. He knows that in the sand there was no way that he was going to get rid of Sweeck, because the sand was 1, easy, and 2, Sweeck is just the best sand rider out of the riders here at the moment. He went all out, and he stretched a small gap as we went past the pit, and as soon as that didn't work, he stopped pacing. That gave Iserbyt the opportunity to come back, because Iserbyt had only rejoined the leaders because Vanthourenhout had already played the team game and seriously held back. Iserbyt came back, made a mistake and crashed, and I think that is the story of Iserbyt's race. Too many mistakes. The start was a mistake. Then in the opening phase of the race he made a couple of mistakes as well. That is why he was running at 15th or 16th at some point. Then once he came back in the final lap, in that forced section, he made 2 small mistakes as well. And those mistakes cost him today. Without those mistakes, he could be there, because Vanthourenhout halted as soon as he realized that he didn't drop Sweeck. At the barriers, Iserbyt could come back, and then he needed to jog for position against Van der Haar, because Van der Haar knew positioning is important. I can't be going into the final straight as 4th or 5th. Van der Haar eventually goes 3rd, which is still not ideal, but Vanthourenhout did what he could and sprints to 3rd. As you say, no blame on him, but I think that he, even in the final lap, still tried. And yes, he maybe went all out there, but else, what is Iserbyt going to do in this sprint? Did you see that sprint from Sweeck? Out of that final corner, he just goes. There's this tiny gap on the outside where he squeezes between Vanthourenhout and the barriers. Vanthourenhout in no way saw that coming, and then he just sprints all out. Pretty long sprint. So much power there. Nobody was able to beat this Sweeck, because Van der Haar, who was sprinting in the slipstream all the time, couldn't even come much closer. He pulled back 1 length, and then in the slipstream could only match the pace of Sweeck. There's no way Iserbyt could have beaten Sweeck in the sprint today.
Sweeck was definitely the strongest today, and that sprint indeed was the gear he was turning there, and just in general the determination. He went like straight from the corner. He immediately was standing on the pedals and just went for it, and you only do that when you are very sure about yourself in a sprint, and he was definitely sure about his sprint. Didn't panic. He was very happy to stay in second wheel behind Vanthourenhout for the entirety of the lap. He didn't give that position away, and then in the sprint, you could just see that the guy was not going to give this away, and this whole season for him is turning out to be, at the moment, to be a very good season. Something changed for him when he joined Krelan, and it looks like it's just going better and better. And obviously, I think what helps is that the training camp that he had in the European Championships week, or the week of the European Championships, that definitely helped him. And I think that right now he's just in a very good form. Mentally, I think he's in a very good place, and with a new team, he just has that new spirit. Already won his first World Cup, and now he's already at his second. So I think for him, he's just at a good place, and he's definitely enjoying the moments right now.
Yeah, and today was a very good course for him as well. It was fast, had these turns, and well, I had expected a lot more sand based on the course map, and that was relatively disappointing. But still, even without the sand, this is a very good course for Sweeck. This is the type of course that he excels on. Go back and see the races he did well in when he was at Paulshaus, or even before when he was still at the... what was it called? I think it was called Krelan even. I don't know, it was Era Vastgoed is what he raced for before he joined Paulshaus, one of the Roodhoofd teams actually. And then he won a race in Neerpelt a couple of times, I think 2 years in a row. That course was also a forest course, came somewhat close, but had a bit more elevation compared to what we had today. So yeah, a good course for Sweeck, and he's just in the form of his life. We've been talking about it for the season. The entire season we've said it. Sweeck is in the form of his life. The wins will come, and now he's racking them up. First Maasmechelen, then Niel, and now here in the Beekse Bergen as well. Next week Pidcock is coming, and of course, maybe Pidcock will win with ease. But maybe he won't, because he's going to face strong opposition. The course next week in Merksplas is not the perfect course for Pidcock. It's a very fast course, very flat. So who knows, maybe Sweeck can pull off an offset there. And crosses like today are the reason that Cyclocross World Cup and Cyclocross in general will survive without Pidcock, Van der Poel and Van Aert. Today was an amazing cross. It was super tense until the final second. The women's cross, which we'll talk about later, was also super exciting. The cross will also survive without the big names. And of course, it becomes much more fun when they are there, because they will increase the level, they will raise the level even more. So very good times to be a neutral cross follower, or even if you are a biased cross follower that is rooting for one of the riders. Who we haven't really mentioned so far in the leading group were the Balhaas Trek duo, Van der Haar and Nieuwenhuis. What did you think about the race of Van der Haar? He comes just short once again, claiming his third second place in the World Cup in a row. Did he do anything wrong, or was it again just a matter of Sweeck being too strong?
In my opinion, there was not really something that he did wrong. He stayed in the wheels quite well. The barriers, from time to time were not really nice, because, the others were able to hop them and he wasn't. So then he had to sometimes close a gap left and right. But I think that overall, it seemed to me, especially during the race, I wasn't convinced about Van der Haar if he was actually going to be able to finish in first. While, sometimes he can give you this impression that he's actually very good. And today, just, he was there and he looked good, but just not able to beat Sweeck. And in the last lap, yeah, when you get overtaken by somebody that had to chase for 2-3 laps, and then you have to get him back again just before the sand section, those kind of efforts are not necessary and shouldn't, take place. But then, of course, the barrier played a role, because, Iserbyt was able to jump those barriers, had a little bit of overspeed, was able to get in front in that corner, and then Van der Haar had to wait for 2-3 corners and then get him back just before the sand section, which costs a little bit of energy, and those efforts, especially in the last lap, will add up to eventually that ultimate sprint. And I think that in the end, for Van der Haar, it was probably the highest achievable, and I think that in the end it was a very strong race from his side, but just not enough to beat Sweeck.
I had the feeling he was on the back foot the entire race. The number of times that he was chasing on the start-finish straight, I lost track at some point, but it felt like almost every lap he had to close a small gap there. And indeed, part of it was down to him hopping or not hopping the barriers and needing to hop off his bike. He lost a couple of seconds there every lap, and then needed to close them throughout the second part of the course. And in general, this is a course where if you are in third, fourth or fifth of a group, it's going to be stretched out due to the number of corners, especially in the forest section. And it felt like he was on the back foot for almost the entire race. But as is often the case with Van der Haar, then in the final lap he is able to really unleash his power and get under steam. And then he still gets a second place today, which is deserved. Strong showing by him, and it's a typical Van der Haar race where he's struggling in the first part of the race, and the further you get into the race, the more his diesel engine is warmed up and he's able to really get in contention for the win. Really like this move in the final lap to take the lead after he was on a small gap as well. That was a great show of class and awareness by him. He knew that he had to go into the forest section first, made a couple of mistakes in that section the previous laps, and ultimately just loses out to Vanthourenhout, who comes back with a late move. But it was a good move, and I like that awareness, and it was a good race, and as always a smart one. He kept his energy for the final lap, something that can't really be said about his teammate Nieuwenhuis. Nieuwenhuis wasted a lot of energy to come back to the front, which was necessary because he had a bad starting position. But then his decision to really go all out in the middle of the race, this road attack, a bit questionable. I think that if he races a bit smarter, he comes into the game in the final lap and has a bit more left. It was clear that once he joined the leading group, he might be the fastest on paper, but he was in 5th position and his legs were already cut off, so that he still outsprints Iserbyt is pretty impressive. But maybe he should have waited a bit with that attack and kept something back. But on the other hand, maybe he was pulling the team tactic cards. With Iserbyt being behind, he maybe thought, well, if I pace, then Lars van der Haar will get into a better opportunity in the final phases of the race. We saw that Sweeck also was pacing quite a couple of times with the overall in his head to not let Iserbyt come back.
Yeah, I agree. But I think that for Nieuwhuis, it was for him difficult already to come back. And the chase took a lot of energy out of him. Then he just went for it, and I guess he hoped for Vanthourenhout and Sweeck to not react. Eventually they did. He was then ahead, and on this course it's also kind of difficult to, abandon a situation. When you're at the front, it's very hard to let the others by again. You go from one corner to the other. It's a beautiful course, and then at a certain point, I think then when you're in the lead, you're just, you keep the lead and you just keep pushing. And I think that kind of, was what Nieuwhuis was doing in the race. And then in the end, yeah, just not enough to get on the podium. But nevertheless, once again, a race that he can look back to and be like, well, this is serious business, with the best of the roster at the moment. He's able to compete very well. The plan was that he needs to perform well next year. So I think that he's doing everything right at the moment and keeps on amazing me, because I'm really curious if this progression is something that we will see over the course of the season and he will be able to maintain it, or if it's going to be difficult for him in some of the races. But, he's picking his races, he's careful with his program, and the progress is there, or at least it's stable. So it looks very good for him, and excited if what his move to Baloise will bring even more in the future.
Let's look at our entire top 10 then. We discussed the top 5 of Sweeck, Van der Haar, Vanthourenhout, Nieuwenhuis and Iserbyt already. We saw that just 17 seconds behind the winner, Felipe Orts claimed an all-time best result for a Spanish rider in a Cyclocross World Cup. He ends 6th. That's an improvement on his personal best, which was the 9th place or 8th place in Bern. Not entirely sure on that one. He was just ahead of Niels van der Putten, Ryan Kamp, Vincent Baestaans and Jens Adams. Quite some usual suspects in there, but again, we can't really go around Felipe Orts. Don't necessarily want to repeat what we already said in the Namur episode, where we were already praising him for a 6th place at the European Championships, but it's again a very good result, and it's a huge step up. Last year we spoke with him after his podium place in Leuven, and he was so happy that he got a podium place in a ETIAS cross back then in Leuven, and he said, I want to become a regular contender in the top 10 of the big races. And this year he's certainly delivering so far with a number of top 10 results. 6th place, amazing to see him do that good. Spanish rider, yeah, just amazing, and it just adds to the question marks we have around him. And what course does he excel? He apparently can do anything, because Namur and today were extremes, and in both races he ends 6th. Super good.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, there were some moments that we could see him on the broadcast, and he maintained it very well and was able to fight his way to 6th. And look, he's super motivated and he takes cyclocross very serious. He like you said, only a win in the ETIAS cross for him, or a win on the podium for him, was already super motivating, and he's definitely somebody that goes step by step through his career. And he made that move to Burgos, and a pro-continental road team that supports him as well in the cyclocross. And you can just see he started in the beginning of the season. There were some races in Spain where we saw that Kevin Fernandez was actually able to beat him, and he was struggling at some races. Tabor was definitely a race which wasn't the greatest, but now it's getting together, and actually at races that do matter a little bit. I mean, Neil wasn't really a great race for him, but just overall it's getting together. He's improving, especially from last season, and for him, it's now a case of trying to find even more improvements on what he's doing right now, because I think that he is, definitely looking ahead, and he wants to eventually join the guys in front. So to be able to do that, you need to be critical at yourself, but also enjoy the moments. And I think that for him, at the moment, he's, I wouldn't say overperforming, but he's definitely, getting the maximum out of it. And it's, great to see someone from Spain, not a traditional cyclocross country in a way. They have a big history in terms of racing and organizing, definitely in the Basque country. But, it's definitely good to see a different flag in the top 10 and somebody that's super motivated to have a good result.
I think for the rest in the top 10, not that many interesting things. I mean, Bastaan's getting a 9th place is certainly good. I do think this is a course that suits Bastaan's. 9th place is finally good to see him get a top 10 result again. He's been struggling a bit this season, so happy to see him up there. Same goes for Ryan Kamp, one of the riders who is now out of the under 23 category, is in the elite category, first year elite, and he together with Mees Hendricks have been a bit up and down throughout the season, and there's nothing wrong with that. Again, we've said it many times already this season, consistency comes with the age, and they are first year elite, so this year is really a lot of learning, and if you can get in the top 10 a couple of times, that's already good news. Hendricks was running in 5th at some point, dropped back a little bit, but certainly a not bad, to say the least. It's pretty decent actually to finish 12th, and it was so close together there. Definitely good result for him. Pim Ronhaar then in 20th. Maybe not the race he had hoped for, but not a course for Ronhaar this. Too fast. He is more for the heavier courses. But there's been some other news around him. He has made the decision to race with the elites after the European Under-23 Championships. Last year we made a podcast with him prior to the World Championships, and there he already indicated that if he didn't have a Continental Championships jersey to show off, that he was considering jumping to the elite category anyway, because he didn't put too much value to a second Under-23 title and more sees it as a development step, a step in his development that it's a stepping stone, and he really wanted to go to the elites, so he's made that decision now as well. Then let's go and talk about the women's race. That was an entertaining race as well. We had the fastest start for Fem van Empel. She took the initiative in the first lap. She was jumping the barriers, first time this season that she's jumping the lead barriers, and she was able to create a gap ahead of Alvarado and Pieterse. They quickly closed that small gap, and that led to a situation with 3 leaders. Alvarado and Pieterse for Alpecin de Koning, and then, of course, Fem van Empel, the woman of the season so far. She was looking for a 5th World Cup victory in a row. Denise Betsema had a bad start and was suffering all race. She had a mechanical. I think she had a puncture at some point as well. It was a rough day out for Denise Betsema. Shirin van Anrooij also had a bad start. She was running in 8th after the first lap, but managed to move up towards the front. In the front, Vos and Vos closed the gap, which meant we had 5 leaders. However, it was clear that Pieterse and Van Empel were, just like in the previous weeks, the strongest. Alvarado had a crash and made a couple of mistakes, which meant that Fem van Empel and Pieterse opened the gap. Van Anrooij, she was closing the gap. She came from all the way back and eventually, going into the penultimate lap, closed the gap. She sat in, took a bit of rest, and then as we were on the final lap, we were going into the final lap, she went for the almost classic Lucinda Brand style road attack. She attacked. Pieterse and Van Empel, they were like, well, you do it. No, you do it. So Pieterse for the first time really making Van Empel take the initiative and carry the race based on her status. And Van Empel did so, but she reacted too late. The gap was 5 seconds. And then, when we came to the barriers, the gap was still 5 seconds. At the barriers, Van Empel and Pieterse looked to close the gap. They really came to 2 or 3 bike lengths of Van Anrooij, but then Van Anrooij managed to stretch that gap out again and gave it everything on the final road stretch towards the line. And Van Empel came super close, but Van Anrooij just held on and took her first World Cup win of her career ahead of Fem van Empel, who ends second, and then put Pieterse in third. Certainly a comeback ride by Van Anrooij. Did you at any point foresee her even be in contention for the win again?
No. I mean, no, but it's... that's the racing, especially on a fast course, when you are a little bit in doubt and you have this moment where you're not willing to chase somebody and you give them 2, 3, 4 seconds. It's very difficult to close that gap, and they gave her that gap, and then it's from Van Anrooij to make sure that she brings it home, which with those two behind is definitely difficult. And Van Empel, was probably thinking that Pieterse would be the one closing the gap once again, and Pieterse was gambling and hoping that Van Empel was going to be the one closing that gap. I think that in the end, Van Empel is definitely the one that should have closed that gap. When you are the better sprinter on a course like this, which suits her perfectly, she had been the one definitely in the race that was the stronger out of the three. And just in the end, you are the one leading the World Cup, so if you really want to have the points, you also need to take some sort of initiative. And I think that for her, she could have won. Especially if you look at that sprint in the end. Pieterse, despite the fact that she was sitting in the wheel for the entirety of the lap, eventually was not able to get around in the slipstream, while Van Empel for the whole lap was able to pace. But it doesn't mean that because all of this happened that Van Anrooij's win is not a legitimate win. You need to get that gap first, and then you need to hold the gap. And I think that she did it perfectly. She did super and was able to to keep the gap till the finish line. Kept on fighting the way Van Anrooij almost every time rides, just fighting till the finish line, and she was able to get her first World Cup victory.
Just already for the fact that she was able to come back into the race, she deserved the win. I mean, it's the fault of Van Empel herself that she doesn't win. And again, just like the other race she didn't win in Molenbeek, her attitude after the race was a bit weird. On one hand, she is saying, oh well, I only came for a podium, so I'm still satisfied, didn't want to lose too many points. On the other hand, she's saying, I made a mistake and I can learn from my mistake. I think it's again, just like in Molenbeek, a bit of, I don't really want to fully acknowledge that I made a mistake, whilst I do know that I made a mistake that cost me the win. She should have directly reacted, and it's the first time that we see this season that Pieterse is really saying, okay, Fem, you have won all these races this year. You have the best sprint. It's up to you to do the work. And today that eventually costs Pieterse a potentially second place, but it's a step in the right direction, I think, for her, that she needs to try and let Van Empel do more work, especially on these faster courses, if she wants to have a shot at the victory. But at the same time, this immediately, to me at least, made clear that even if you let Fem van Empel do all the work in the final lap, Pieterse sat in the draft the entire lap, Van Empel starts sprinting right out of the final corner, Pieterse in the wheel the entire time and can't get past Van Anrooij. Or can't get past Van Empel. How do you beat Fem van Empel? It's on a course like this, you need to have like the luck that they are looking at each other, because else you can't do it. Even if you let Fem van Empel pace an entire lap, she still beats you in the sprint. So, Pieterse, well, she did what she should have done earlier in the race. She paced throughout the fourth section and had Alvarado make a mistake which gave Pieterse a gap. The only reason that Fem van Empel at that point was still in the race was because she was able to bunny hop the barriers. If she needed to walk them, Pieterse would have stretched that gap of 5 seconds to 10 seconds and she would have been gone. But now that Fem van Empel is also jumping the barriers, she is taking away one of the cards Buck Pieterse has. So instead of what Pieterse needs to do, taking away the cards of Fem van Empel is taking away the cards of Pieterse to play. And that is just super impressive by Fem van Empel. She is really becoming a more and more complete rider. She was one of only 3 runners or riders that we saw at the front of the race that were able to bunny hop the barriers. Of course, we know that normally Anna Kay is able to bunny hop, and there's a couple of other riders that are a bit further back in the race. But it's just impressive that she is investing in her technique, investing in her sprint. And everything is becoming so good that she's becoming such a complete rider that it's super difficult to beat her. Of course, it will be possible for Pieterse to beat her, but it's becoming more and more complicated because today, even when she lets Van Empel do all the work, she still wasn't able to outsprint her. So Very difficult for Pieterse going forward, I think. I don't know if you know anything that she should play or try in future weeks.
On a course like this, it's just difficult. I mean, you can try a lot of things. I think that definitely that attempt where Alvarado let the gap and Pieterse, tried to put Van Empel under pressure was a good attempt. But I think that especially on a course like this, you just need to do it a little bit more often. And you cannot beat Van Empel if you're going to do it fair and square. So you need to play it hard. And you need to make sure that eventually she needs to, you need to compromise her race. And in any way, shape or form, legally obviously, but you need to compromise that race. And that means that the way that Alvarado and Pieterse were doing, leaving the gap, slowing her down, all the tricks that you have in the book of gray areas and whatever, you just need to use them, and then there is a chance, especially on a course like this. I think that when it becomes a little bit tougher, then you need to just counter your own energy and make sure that you are in the right position at the right moment, and then it will come to you anyways. But I think that, right, like with a course like this where it's fast, and you can definitely use a little bit of team tactics. There were moments that Pieterse was pacing on the front stretch while Van Empel was in her wheel, and Alvarado needed to close a gap. Those kind of things, they don't work. If you're when your teammate is on a small gap, you just need to make sure that she's in the wheel, and you need to try to make her suffer and not the other way around, and race against each other, even if you have a good day, because eventually you will come in a scenario like you were saying in terms of Van Empel, beating you anyways fair and square, despite the fact that she was pulling the last lap.
I mean, today was also a perfect course for Van Empel. It was fast, no real decisive features on it, bit of sand towards the end, long finish straight. It's a perfect course for her. But at the other hand, did we see team tactics by Alpes in the Koning? No. Alvarado didn't let the gap fall. She made a mistake. She needed to unclip. She didn't do that on purpose. She was trying to stay in the wheel. Did Pieterse pace? Well, I didn't really have that feeling. To me, it looked more like a fake pace, like she was putting the dummy, like, okay, I'll take the lead, I'll pace very slowly, so Van Empel sits in, and then Alvarado can come back. Do you need to start playing team tactics? Maybe, but Pieterse today said in the interview that she was taking a bit of a different approach, trying to see if this works. Well, I think that today showed it didn't work. Last year in Flamanville, we already saw that even there with the perfect launch to the sprint for Pieterse, with Van Empel coming from very far behind. Still Van Empel takes the win. Van Empel, it wouldn't surprise me at all if she's going to become the fastest sprinter in the world on the road in a couple of years' time. How are you going to beat her in a cross sprint? Super difficult. I will give this a week thought and come up with a solution for her in the preview podcast for the Overijse World Cup. Overijse, of course, a different course, as you already mentioned, tougher course, then it will be more about the power, and maybe on the elevation she can take the upper hand. But I'll need to give this a thought, because for weeks we've said, well, maybe she just needs to let Van Empel do more work, then she does it, and Van Empel is still comfortably better in the sprint. So it's difficult going forward, but today ultimately their rivalry in a way let Van Anrooij take the win, who came from very far behind. At some point it even looked unlikely that she would be on the podium. But yeah, don't take away credit from Van Anrooij, because a super smart timed attack, and it gives her the win. And meanwhile, Pieterse is still waiting for her first win, but at some point it will come. At some point the win will come for Pieterse. Let's look at our entire top 10 then. Van Anrooij took the win ahead of Van Empel and Pieterse, as we said. One more interesting thing. Van Empel, of course we know she's made the decision to race with the elites now. But I'm wondering why Pieterse then wasn't wearing the leader's jersey of the World Cup. She's leading the Under-23 World Cup. And as Van Empel has made the decision to move to the elites, I think by regulation Pieterse should now be wearing the leader's jersey of the Under-23 World Cup. Maybe they just forgot about that because the decision was made relatively late. Anyway, Alvarado in 4th ahead of Marianne Vos and Capablanca Vash. 7th place for Lucinda Brand, who made her return after a broken hand in the Tabor course practice. Schreiber is in 8th ahead of Aniek van Alphen and Denise Betsma, who we already discussed having a rough race. Let's talk about the riders in 4th and 5th, Alvarado and Vos. First off, Alvarado. She was having a pretty good race, able to keep up with Van Empel and Pieterse. then had a crash, chain dropped as a result of that, and was basically out of contention for the podium. What's your takeaway on her race?
Yeah, I mean, compromised by the crash, but I think that in the end she kind of came into the position where she would have ended up, I think, without the crash. Maybe she would have been on the podium, but it's difficult to say. It is the if and maybes, but in the end, I think that the race at itself, up until the crash, was good. But, you know, she struggled from time to time to close the gaps. The mistakes were there left and right. And, you know, sometimes it suggests when you make those mistakes that you're a little bit under pressure. And, you know, I think that if you look at the later stage of the race, she tried to come back, but just wasn't really able to do that, which, you know, suggests me that I think that she was definitely on the limit at that point. And, you know, the others in front were not really slowing down that much. But, you know, I think that just in the end, fourth place was for her the maximum achievable, and definitely not a bad result.
Certainly a good result, picking up on the momentum of the win in Niel. Decent race, could have contended for the podium, wasn't to be today. And that's a bit of the story of most of the bigger races this season for Alvarado, with just a bit of bad luck at the wrong moments. Today a mistake, and the mistake was easy made with these many ruts in the course, but she can definitely move forward from this, and she sits in second in the overall of the World Cup now. So yeah, that's definitely something I think she would have been satisfied with if you told her after 5 races, so that's 1/3 of the World Cup, you were in second place, far behind Fem van Empel though, but yeah, I think she can be happy with that. And the same goes for Marianne Vos, Cyclocross World Champion, best race of the season so far for her. I've heard that she has some issues with her back. Her entire back was taped in. Don't know the full details there, but today was definitely the best race of her season so far. Course did suit her, but still the form looked much better. No fade in the second part of the race, so she can be happy as well. Then Lucinda Brand returning from an injury. You could definitely see that today that injury still affected her, both in terms of form, but especially in terms of cornering. With so many corners here, you can't really permit to lose a 1/10 or 2/10 in every corner because of your grip on your steer. It definitely looked a bit shaky from time to time, having a couple of drifts, quite many mistakes that we saw. But she's on her way back. What's your thought on the comeback of Lucinda Brand?
She's definitely not that far off. I think that it's that she could be happy with the fact that it's the gap between her not racing and now coming back. It's not a lot. So, but you can definitely see that she's still missing a little bit of bike feeling in a way. The corners, like you said, were not really the greatest, but I think that's partly due to the confidence. Maybe we don't know how much ability she lost because of that compromise and the injury, and how that affects her on the bike. It's difficult because the corners in a way today as well, there were definitely some corners which were very bumpy and very hard to ride and stuff. So I think that in the end for her it was definitely a very good race, and she just has to get through it. It's not the nicest of races to start back very fast. You have not a lot of time to get into a rhythm, and you're already thrown into the third and fourth lap. So I think that for her it was just a matter of surviving. I think she did well, and from here she will just make sure to improve race by race.
Yeah, she will come back and things will get better for her. So I don't think this is a bad starting point, but I think she wished it would have been better. But then, as you say, it was a very bumpy course, so definitely not the best for her to get the season starting. Cool. Then we'll take a look at some racing in the rest of Europe. There was the Cyclocross in Auxerre in France, where Joshua Dubois took the win ahead of Crispin and Chanel. The women's race was won by Anne Morichon ahead of Cyrine Mouillet and Gwenning Le Dantec. There was racing in Hitnau in Switzerland, where Jacob Riemann took the win ahead of Joëlle Bertolini and Laurens Sweeck. Casasola won the women's race ahead of Keller and Garibaldi. There was racing in Spain in Tarancon, where Suarez Fernandez took the win ahead of Inguanzo Macho and Rodriguez Novoa. The women's race was won by González Blanco ahead of Rodriguez Revere and Cueto Verga. Racing in Japan even this weekend, the Rafa Supercross of Nobayama was won by Hirji Oda ahead of Yu Taknushi and Hikaru Kosaka. The women's race was won by Sa Ogawa ahead of Eri Yonami and Kokoro Okara. It's really getting more and more difficult, and that's why Issam will tell us where the Toy Cup in the Czech Republic was held.
Thank you. The Toy Cup in Vigeli nad Luznici, I think. The men's race was won by Adam Tupalik in front of Riman Jakub and Marek Konva. And the women's race was won by Kristina Zemanova. And behind her was Pavla Havlikova and Katarina Hladikova.
Then there was racing in Northampton yesterday. Eric Brunner getting another win in the Northampton International held in Northampton. Then Curtis White was second there ahead of Gunnar Holmgren. In the women's race, there was another Holmgren in second, Eva Holmgren mixing it up with the elite, but she fell just short of Austin Killips, who took the win, with Lizzie Gonzalez in third. And then Issam, the final race this weekend was actually a C1 in Romania. What went down there?
The race, I will not try to not offend the Romanians, but it was in Lunca Timusului, a C1 race, debut for Jos van der Meer. He started his season immediately with a win. Behind him it was Josef Attila Malnassi, the Romanian, and third place was for Ruben Lembrechts, the Belgian rider. And at the women's category, the victory went to Audrey de Keersmaker. Behind there it was Regina Schmidl and Floor van Elsacker rounded off that podium there in Timisoara, Romania.
Well, then I think we've covered Europe and the world for this weekend. Still one race to go tonight in Northampton again. Thank you again for being here, Issam, to discuss the racing of the 5th round already of the World Cup.
Yes, thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
We'll be back this week with a preview episode for the Overijssel World Cup, which will of course cover the long-anticipated comeback of the cyclocross world champion Tom Pidcock. We'll also take a look ahead at the Super Prestige in Merckxplas. That's what you can expect from us this week. Thanks everyone for listening, and goodbye.